my name on the lease, but not on the title. That's the part people don't understand when I tell them this story. They think the worst thing my brother did was take the house. But the worst thing he did was make sure, from the very beginning, that I never had anything to take back. I found out about the storage unit the same way I find out about everything in this family, by accident. By being the one who shows up. It was February in Winnipeg, which means it was the kind of cold that makes your nose hairs freeze the second you step outside. I was standing in the parking lot of a Storage Mart off Pembina Highway at 7 in the morning because my brother had forwarded me an email from the property manager. No message, just forwarded, with the subject line, Final Notice, Unit 14B. Outstanding balance. The bill was $412 and some change. He had not paid it since October. He didn't ask me to pay it. He didn't need to. That's the thing about my brother. He communicates entirely in forwarded emails and long silences, and somehow I have spent 29 years learning to translate both into my own obligations. I paid the balance on my phone in the parking lot, then I asked the property manager to let me in. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense without the context, and the context is something I spent a long time being too ashamed to say out loud. Our dad died 18 months ago. He left behind a house in East Kildonan that he'd owned since 1987, a storage unit full of what my brother called junk, a small checking account, and a lot of unfinished paperwork. Dad was not an organized man. He was warm and funny and generous and completely incapable of filing anything on time. When he was diagnosed with COPD 3 years before he died, we knew the end was coming slowly. But we didn't talk about it the way you're supposed to. We didn't sit down and make a plan. We just kept going. My brother's name is not on anything I'm going to say from here forward. I've thought about this. He's still my brother, but he's also the person who handed me a printed spreadsheet at our father's kitchen table 6 weeks after the funeral and told me that after accounting for probate fees, outstanding property taxes, and what he called administrative costs, his time, essentially, my share of the estate was negative $14,000. I am a forensic accountant. I work for a mid-sized firm in downtown Winnipeg. My job, literally, is to find the number that doesn't match. And I looked at that spreadsheet and I did not say a single word because he was my brother and I loved my father and I was sitting in my dead father's kitchen and I could not make my mouth work. I signed what he put in front of me. I told myself it was grief. I told myself I'd revisit it when I could think straight. He sold the house 4 months later for $387,000 and moved to a condo in River Heights. He texted me a photo of the view from his balcony. I was living in a one-bedroom in St. Vital that I paid for myself, the same way I had always paid for everything myself, because my brother had told me when I was 22 that our dad's credit wasn't good enough to co-sign a lease for me and I'd have to figure it out. I figured it out. That is what I do. The storage unit was cold in a different way than outside, the kind of cold that doesn't move. I pulled up the rolling door and the smell hit me first. Cardboard, motor oil, something faintly sweet underneath that I couldn't place. I had a flashlight on my keychain. I turned it on and swept it across the room. It was a disaster. That's the honest description. Boxes stacked unevenly, loose tools, a broken shop vac, a card table with a worked top, rolls of insulation that had come partially undone. I could see my breath. I almost left. I almost pulled the door back down and called my brother and told him to deal with his own forwarded emails. But I didn't, because I am the person who shows up, and also because I noticed something that didn't belong. In the back left corner, behind a tower of banker's boxes, there was a padlock, not a cheap combination lock. A proper key padlock, relatively new, the kind you'd put on something you intended to keep locked. Everything else in that unit had the look of things forgotten. This lock had the look of something secured. I didn't have the key. I called my brother. He didn't answer. He never answers before 10. I left a voicemail that I kept deliberately neutral, the way you do when you're not sure yet what you're looking at. I said I was at the storage unit clearing out the balance, asked if there was anything specific he wanted me to do with the contents, mentioned the padlock. He called back 11 minutes later, which is the fastest he has called me back in recent memory. "Leave it," he said. "No good morning. No thank you for handling that. Just leave it." I asked him what was behind it. "Dad's old tools, nothing valuable. Just leave it. I'll deal with it when the weather gets better." I said okay. I hung up. I stood there in the cold with my flashlight and I thought about the spreadsheet. I thought about the administrative costs. I thought about the photo of the view from his balcony. Then I thought about the padlock. In forensic accounting, there is a concept called a red flag. A red flag is not proof of anything. It is just a data point that doesn't fit the expected pattern. A red flag means look closer. The padlock was a red flag. I called a locksmith. He was there in 40 minutes. He charged me $80, which I noted carefully in my phone because I was already building a file without quite admitting to myself that I was building a file. The lock opened. I pulled it free. I moved the banker's boxes. Behind them was not a shelving unit of old tools. Behind them was a door, an actual interior door with a frame installed into what I had assumed was the back wall of the unit. It was a newer installation. I could see where the drywall had been cut and patched around the frame, and the patch job was competent but not invisible. Someone had built this. Someone had put real effort into making sure the unit appeared to end before it actually did. I opened the door. The room on the other side was smaller, maybe 8 by 10 feet, and it was dry in a way the main unit wasn't. There was a dehumidifier running in the corner. That was the sweet smell, the moisture being pulled out of the air. Extension cord running back through a small hole drilled in the wall. Someone had been paying the hydro on this separately or running it off the main unit's account without the storage facility knowing. I made a note. There were shelves. Floor to ceiling on 3 walls, the kind of heavy-duty wire shelving you'd get at Canadian Tire. And on every shelf, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and stored in archival boxes, were stamps. I need you to understand that I did not immediately understand what I was looking at. I took one of the boxes down and opened it, and inside was a small glassine envelope containing a single postage stamp mounted on a black presentation card. The stamp was pale violet. It was old. The edges were clean. There was a small typed label on the card that read, Canada, 1851, 12D Black, VF75. And below that, a number that I initially assumed was a catalog reference. It was not a catalog reference. It was value, and it had 6 figures. I put the box down very carefully. Then I sat on the floor of that secret room in a Storage Mart off Pembina Highway in February, and I tried to remember how to breathe. My father collected stamps. I knew this. Everyone knew this. We thought it was a hobby. We thought it was the thing he did at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons with his magnifying glass and his catalogs, the way some dads do crosswords or watch football. We teased him about it. My brother used to roll his eyes. Dad and his little papers, he'd say, like it was embarrassing. I started going through the shelves. I am a forensic accountant. I am not a philatelist. But I know how to research, and I know how to read documentation. And my father had kept meticulous records, which was interesting, because he had never kept meticulous records of anything else in his life. Every item had a provenance card. Every acquisition had a date and a source and a condition grade. Some of these stamps he had been collecting since the 1970s. Some he had acquired at estate auctions. Some had come from dealers in Toronto and London, and in one case, Brussels. I photographed everything. Every shelf, every box, every card. My phone battery dropped to 12%. I found a charging cable in my bag and sat on the floor and charged my portable battery pack while I kept working. 3 hours later, I had a rough inventory. I'm going to be honest with you, I did not know enough to properly value what I was looking at, but I knew enough to know I needed to call someone who did. I called a colleague. She works in estate valuation, not stamps specifically, but she knew a name, a dealer in Toronto with a specialty in Canadian philatelic material. I called him from the parking lot, standing in the Winnipeg cold with my breath making clouds. Standing in the Winnipeg cold with my breath making clouds. I described what I'd found. He asked me to email the photos. He called me back in 2 hours. He said he needed to see them in person to give me real numbers, but based on the photos and my descriptions, he was looking at a collection that was, and he used the word conservative twice before he said it, conservatively worth between $800,000 and $1.2 million. I sat in my car for a long time. I thought about my father at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons. I thought about the magnifying glass he kept in the top drawer, the one with the green handle that I used to sneak out and use as a kid when I wanted to feel like a scientist. I thought about how he never once told us what he was building in that unit, and I thought I understood why. Because if he had, my brother would have found a way to make it his. Dad knew. He always knew. I also thought about the spreadsheet, the one with the negative $14,000, the one I signed. Here's the thing about signed documents. I am a forensic accountant. I know what they mean and I know what they don't mean. They mean you agreed to something at a moment in time. They don't mean you agreed to fraud. I called my lawyer that same afternoon. We spent 2 weeks building the file. There is a reason I went into forensics and not corporate tax. I am very, very good at finding the trail. The storage unit had been in my father's name only. My brother had not disclosed it during probate. That is not a clerical error. That is concealment of estate assets, which in Manitoba is not a gray area. The administrative costs on the spreadsheet, his time, his labor, were not legitimate estate expenses under the Wills and Succession Act. He had charged the estate for 32 hours of work at an hourly rate he had set himself, with no supporting documentation and no beneficiary consent. The house sale, he had listed it below market. I pulled the comparable sales from that quarter. In East Kildonan at that time, a house in that condition on that street should have listed between $410 and $430. He sold it for $387. The buyer was a numbered company. I spent 3 days tracing the numbered company. I don't need to tell you whose name was attached to the numbered company. You already know. He had sold our father's house to himself at a discount using estate funds to cover the transaction costs, and he had presented me with a spreadsheet designed to make me feel like I owed him money. My lawyer sent the letter on a Thursday morning. I know it was Thursday because I was in a deposition for a completely unrelated file, and my phone kept buzzing in my jacket pocket, and I kept my face completely still for 90 minutes until I could step out into the hallway. My brother called 4 times before noon. I let it go to voicemail 4 times. On the 5th call, I answered. He didn't yell. That surprised me. I had expected yelling. Instead, his voice was very controlled, which was somehow worse. He said this was a misunderstanding. He said he had been managing the estate under enormous stress and some of the documentation had been incomplete. He said he was sure we could work this out as a family. I said, I am sure we can work it out too. That's why I have a lawyer. He said my name in the voice he has used my entire life when he thinks I am being unreasonable. The voice that says, you don't understand the full picture. The voice that has been telling me since I was 8 years old, whatever I was looking at it wrong. I said, I am a forensic accountant. The full picture is literally my job. And then I hung up. The settlement took 4 months. My brother's lawyer was good, but the paper trail I had built was better. The concealment of the stamp collection alone, which ultimately appraised at $1.1 million, was enough to void the original estate distribution. The house sale was a separate matter that I will not go into detail about because it is still technically unresolved. But I will say that numbered companies are only as anonymous as the people who set them up. And my brother had set his up himself without a lawyer, using an online incorporation service. When the stamps went to auction, a specialty auction in Toronto handled by the dealer I had called from the parking lot, the final sale came to $987,000. Not the high end of the estimate, but not the low end either. My father's Sunday afternoon hobby, the thing my brother used to roll his eyes at, turned out to be the most valuable thing he owned. My share of the revised estate was substantial. I used part of it to pay off my student loans, which I had been carrying for 7 years. I used part of it to put a down payment on a house, a real one, in my name, with my name on the title and no one else's. I drove past the condo in River Heights on my way home from the lawyer's office on the day the settlement was finalized. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just drove past and looked at the building for a moment, at the rows of windows, at whoever was up there behind the glass, and I thought about all the Sunday afternoons when my father sat at the kitchen table with his green-handled magnifying glass and his little papers, building something patient and quiet and entirely his own. He knew what he was doing. He always knew. He just needed someone to show up. I keep thinking about my dad's green-handled magnifying glass, the one I used to steal from the top drawer when I was a kid because it made me feel like a scientist. He never said anything when he caught me with it. He just held out his hand and I gave it back, and he went back to the kitchen table and his little papers. I didn't understand for most of my life that he was teaching me something. What I've come to believe, not from any book or sermon, but just from living through this, is that the things we build with quiet integrity tend to outlast everything built on shortcuts. My father spent decades collecting those stamps. Not to impress anyone, not to hold over anyone's head. Just because he found something worth caring about and he cared about it carefully, every Sunday afternoon in the ordinary light of an ordinary kitchen. That kind of patient honesty has a way of compounding. It doesn't always pay off in your lifetime. Sometimes it pays off through you after you. My brother was smart. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier to dismiss him as foolish. He wasn't foolish, he was clever in the specific way of people who have decided that cleverness is enough, that if you can outmaneuver someone on paper, you've won something real. He built a spreadsheet designed to make me feel like I owed him money. He sold a house to a numbered company he incorporated himself, online without a lawyer, because he was confident the details wouldn't matter. That confidence was his undoing, not my doing. His. What I had that he didn't wasn't luck, and it wasn't anger. It was the willingness to look at the number that didn't match and follow it wherever it went. Even when following it was uncomfortable. Even when part of me still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. That's the thing about working in forensics. You learn pretty quickly that the truth doesn't care about your feelings. It just sits there in the data, waiting for someone to show up and look at it directly. I showed up. I looked. I also want to say something about the months between finding those stamps and the settlement being finalized. They were not easy months. There were days when I wondered if I was doing the right thing, if it was worth it, if some version of letting it go wouldn't have been simpler. There is nothing simple about going up against your own family in a legal dispute. There is nothing that prepares you for the particular loneliness of it. But I kept going because I understood, by that point, that this wasn't really about the money. It was about whether I was going to keep being the person who signs things without reading them, who pays bills forwarded without context, who mistakes endurance for loyalty. I had spent 29 years being useful to people who had decided I didn't need to understand the full picture. At some point, you have to decide that you are, in fact, capable of understanding the full picture, that deciding is its own kind of freedom. My father knew what he was building. He just needed someone honest enough to find it and stubborn enough to follow the trail all the way to the end. I'm glad it was me.